So I'm going to take a break from recording the videos that I had been planning to record up to now to comment on something that has recently happened. Last night, as I turned on the news, I saw a report that the State University of New York at Binghamton had introduced a program over the summer regarding its training of RAs, or residential advisors. These are the people, for anyone who may not be familiar with how college campuses work, these are the people who are responsible for dealing with sort of day-to-day activities when it comes to dorms. They're there for students to go to when they have problems. They have a role in administration and so on. Anyway, so it turns out that at Binghamton University, there was a program in which RAs were enlisted over the summer, and it was called Stop White People 2K16. Now, if you read the description of this program, and I'll provide links to where you can find it and so on, if you read the description to it, you'll see that it basically says that the purpose of the program is to instruct RAs in diversity and all these other sort of buzzwords that we've been seeing around college campuses lately. So the point is to instruct them in diversity, but also to tell them how to combat certain arguments that one might hear from the perspective of someone who's opposed to all of these diversity requirements, the affirmative action quotas with regard to college admissions, the general notions of white privilege, white supremacy, structural racism, and so on. It specifically mentions that one of the purposes of the program will be to combat people who make such arguments and to give RAs arguments that they can use in response to those people. It says, for example, that racism isn't just hatred against a certain racial or ethnic group. It's hatred of that group plus the fact that the group exercising the hatred wields some kind of social power. And this is the definition that one sees of racism in college campus circles these days. They just say that racism is hatred plus power, so that it's not possible, for example, for a black person to be racist against a white person because, so the story goes, even if the black person hates the white person or has some kind of racial animosity towards them, the black person as a black person does not wield any kind of social power, and so despite the hatred, what's going on is not really racism. The purpose of this program is to instruct RAs in things like that. Okay, so why do I mention this? It's really nothing completely out of the ordinary with regard to what has been in the news surrounding college campuses lately. Anyway, I mean, you had the whole situation with Mizzou and the student protests there. You had what went on at Yale. So this isn't something that we aren't used to seeing. Why then am I taking the time to mention this? Well, I do this because this event in particular hit home for me. The reason for that is that I am an alumnus of Binghamton University. I went there. I only graduated from there last year. And seeing its descent into the kind of general attitude that we see prevailing on college campuses, the sort of general insanity, is, well, it's embarrassing to me. And it's also surprising and disappointing because I expected a place like Binghamton to be able to resist this a little bit better than the typical college. But Binghamton graduates a lot of engineers. It tends to be a very practical place. A lot of people there take up very practical majors, and I would have expected such people to be more resistant to this kind of nonsense. And unfortunately, I was wrong. So essentially what happened is, as I explained, some people created a certain training course over the summer for RAs, and there has been backlash with regard to this. I'd been hearing things on my Facebook feed, for example, and in other places on the internet that are sort of surrounded by other alumni of Binghamton. So I had heard something about this, but I hadn't looked very deeply into it until I actually saw this reported on the news. So there's being a backlash against it, and the response is fairly predictable and fairly typical. They're saying that calling this training program "Stop White People 2K16," despite the obvious sound of it, isn't really racially antagonistic or untoward, because in the way that racism is defined in these places, it is not possible for a non-white person to be racist against a white person, because allegedly white people hold power within American society. So, I mean, one thing to comment on that's fairly obvious about this is the very blatantly question-begging nature of this definition, and the absurd consequences to which it leads. So, if we accept the definition of racism as being hatred of a racial group because of what that racial group is, plus the wielding of power within a society, if we take that definition of racism rather than the more conventional one that most sane people adhere to, which is just simple hatred of another racial group because they are that racial group, if we take that definition, then we're forced to conclude that whether a certain person is racist or not is contingent upon their geographical location. So, for example, if we accept the claim that white people hold some kind of structural power in America, you could take a white person who, for example, hates black people, and if he lives in America, he would be considered a racist under this definition. But if he were, for some reason, to move to, say, South Africa, where the majority of the population is black, and where there are blatant programs in place to redistribute wealth from white people to black people. There's actually a program in South Africa to this effect called Black Economic Empowerment, and it's essentially an extreme form of affirmative action. It's like affirmative action in the United States, but much more serious, much more wide-ranging. So, a very strong case could be made, I think it's fairly obvious, that within South Africa, black people wield structural societal power. Nearly all of the politicians are black. Almost everyone in any significant position of influence is black. Well over 90% of the population is black, and so on. Black people have social power in South Africa. So what this ridiculous definition of racism would imply is that if you took a white person who hated black people and you transported him from America to South Africa, merely by virtue of the fact that this white person now resides within South Africa, he has magically ceased to be a racist. Wow, who knew? Conversely, if you were to take a black person living in America who hated white people because they were white and transport him into South Africa, this person, who previously was not a racist, would become one. Now, isn't this ridiculous? Now, of course, it's fairly easy to point out that this definition is, as I said, question-begging and ridiculous. And the reason I say it's question-begging is that the definition is simply used in order to make it possible for the people behind programs like this Stop White People thing and other things similar to it to be able to avoid the charge that they're anti-white racists. And it's just complete nonsense. They're trying to control language. They're trying to control the discourse. They're trying to define the terms of the discussion, to give the meanings of the words used in debate, the meanings that they want them to have. And when they give those words the meanings that they want them to have, they can control the flow of discussion. They can make it so that certain thoughts, at least if this were to get to an extreme level, would not even be thinkable. So they want to control the discourse. They want to control the limits and the parameters of the discussion. And those of us who are, again, as I said, sane and see the blatantly ridiculous, nonsensical, question-begging, and racist nature of this whole thing and things like it, should fight back by simply pointing out this definition is question-begging. It has the sort of absurd consequences that I mentioned, and to just sort of go from there. Yeah, so it's a blatant power grab. It's a way of redefining terminology so as to get power, and that's fundamentally what this whole drive is about. It's a power play. All of this campus politics that we see not only now at Binghamton but at any other place you'd care to name, it's all a power grab, and this means that those of us who see this and are against it need to do something, and by something I mean we need to take stock of the fact that when it comes to many subjects, perhaps not all, maybe in things like physics and chemistry and medicine and what have you, there's still some kind of sense of decency and respect for intellectualism and intellectual inquiry and scholarship that still exists. But in other softer areas, sociology, anthropology, Africana studies, these various pro-diversity affirmative action departments, and in places like them, the softer sciences, that sort of thing. In these places, there's essentially no room anymore for debate, for scholarship, for honest intellectual inquiry. The whole thing has been politicized. The whole thing has turned into a game of how do we get power from the opposing side by any means necessary. And as is well known, the political left controls college campuses, and they've just been running roughshod over everything because they're virtually unopposed. So what those of us who see this madness need to do is to begin creating alternative intellectual institutions. Because for all intents and purposes, the colleges are gone. Okay, they've been conquered. Now, this may seem difficult, but lucky for us, we have the internet. Okay, almost anyone who has any kind of meaningful or significant knowledge about any topic can produce videos about it, upload them to the internet, and share what they know with other people. And as this proliferates, the universities become increasingly unnecessary. Now, for some things, various certifications are required, medical licenses, law degrees, that sort of thing, things that require professional licensure. The universities still essentially have a lock on these things, and that's because of governmental regulations with regard to licensure. But with regard to things like the teaching of history, let's say, or sociology, or economics, or almost anything. I mean, even the more concrete kind of hard subjects. Even with these, because the internet exists, and because anyone who knows about these things can upload videos, we can, so to speak, secede from the university system. We can create our own decentralized, independent intellectual institutions so that these people become increasingly unnecessary and we no longer have to deal with them and their politicking. That's very important. What this event shows to me is that this absolutely needs to be done. So whoever you are watching this, if you know about anything, if you have any skill at anything, if you're good at computer programming, if you're good at math, if you know a lot of history, whatever it is, make some videos about that and spread it. Spread your knowledge. Don't keep it to yourself. This needs to be done because these people need to be fought. They won't stop. They're doing blatantly racist things like this program. They're covering it up with flowery rhetoric and saying, oh, nothing untoward was done. We were just discussing a variety of perspectives, the way that minorities feel around police and white privilege and the impacts of structural racism, yada, yada, yada. We all know this to be nonsense. We know that it's just rhetoric. We know that they're just spewing words to try and cover up what they're doing. It's clear because only one side of the discussion is ever shut down or fought against. This never happens to the left, and it's because the left is in power. And they will do anything to try and justify and continue their power. So what I'm saying is, look, the universities are a lost cause. We need to just create our own independent intellectual institutions. Part of this is that the professoriate tends to be overwhelmingly left-leaning. And this kind of has a self-reinforcing effect. If there are intelligent people who lean to the right politically and have all sorts of intellectual interests, they're not going to be inclined to get into the university system. They're not going to be inclined to become professors because they know that over the course of their whole professional lives, they're going to be surrounded by people who vehemently disagree with them, who think that simply because they hold the views that they hold, that they are evil, moral reprobates, and for obvious reasons, they don't want to deal with this. And so they self-select out of the university system. And I suspect that you have a lot of really smart people who lean to the right, or who may be libertarians, or conservatives, or what have you, who are against all of this left-wing nonsense that we see on campuses, but who simply go to college, go through the motions, and then just leave all of that behind because they don't want the trouble and the headache associated with having to deal with it. I can definitely say this is true for me. As I mentioned, I only graduated from Binghamton last year. While I was there, I tended to stay away from politics. I kind of kept quiet, kept to myself. I had a very non-political major. Politics was not discussed at all in my classes, and this was very much done deliberately by me. I liked the subject that I chose to major in, but I also very consciously wanted to avoid these kind of political conflicts and debates and so on. I just didn't want to have any part of that because I knew the sort of climate that exists on the typical college campus and that it would get me into hot water if I spoke out too much. So I just sat quietly, I studied a subject that had nothing to do with politics. And I imagine that there are, again, a lot of intelligent people who lean to the right politically who do the same thing. And that talent can't go to waste. We cannot allow these people to simply have their monopoly on intellectual institutions, to have their monopoly on disseminating ideas and getting to influence who believes what in society. We have the internet, we have to make use of it, and we have to make use of anything else we have, because this is just, it's insane. And it's just disappointing to see that a place that I went to, that I until very recently was a part of, descend into this. And I just felt the need to say something about it. Honestly, thinking back on it, I can kind of see foreshadowings of what's going on now. Just last year, there was, this is a kind of a little bit of inside baseball that only someone associated with SUNY Binghamton would know. But last year, what happened is that in the wake of what happened with people like Michael Brown and Eric Garner and their encounters with the police, you had a group of students formed called Students for Change, and this group made waves all over all sorts of campuses. But one of the things that happened at Binghamton specifically was that a group of students gathered. They requested a meeting with Harvey Stenger, who is the president of Binghamton University right now. And they made a list of demands to him, and he responded very reasonably and said that he could not immediately accede to all of their demands, and though he was in favor of diversity and so on, he would not just become an autocrat and overrule the administrative process at the university to simply impose what these students were demanding that he impose. This is completely fair. He essentially said to them, I will try to do what you want me to do, but I will not impose things. Let the process work. Let everything go through its course, and we will have things go your way, hopefully. He said that he was willing to work with them. This was not enough for these people. They began haranguing this man with their demands, with their insistent questions, and he eventually just got tired of it and essentially dropped the mic and walked out. And this made a big splash on Binghamton. Harvey Stenger got a lot of respect from a lot of the conservatives. The Binghamton Review, which is kind of the conservative / libertarian newspaper on campus, wrote a lot about this. I remember this going on. Some of my friends wrote articles pertaining to this. Yeah, so that's kind of a little bit of inside baseball, and it's just sad to see that from this, it's gotten to the point where Stop White People 2K16 is now a training course for RAs. I wonder what's next, but perhaps I shouldn't ask that question because it always gets worse. Something has to be done about this. We have to secede from these people and just start producing our own intellectual content and sort of declaring independence for the university system. Because the longer that the university system is allowed to control what goes on in the intellectual sphere, the worse things are going to be for us. I'm almost inclined to say that we should just do whatever we can to delegitimize the university system and to help bring about its collapse. I mean, even something like a Cloward-Piven strategy, where you essentially just uh, in a Machiavellian way, kind of flood students into the universities, jack up tuition prices, and get them to be so high that no one can afford to go anymore, thereby leading a lot of these universities to financially collapse. I'm almost in favor of that. Okay? But the point is, whoever you are, if you see this and you have any skill, you have any significant knowledge about anything else, go forth and make videos. Talk about things. And this is something that I need to do because I've been relatively unproductive and lazy with regard to my video output. But seeing this has kind of galvanized me to do more, and I think a lot of other people should do more as well. That's it. Again, just really disappointing to see my own college involved in this. I hope this debacle subsides, but you can never know. It's almost guaranteed to get worse. That's all I want to say.